One cannot go back, but you can and should take some of it forward with you. This I am convinced of as a Catholic churchman with Jewish roots. 60 years ago, I made my commitment as a Jesuit, my vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. It would be the equivalent of the promises in matrimony. And so this cross is the symbol and sign of my lifelong commitment. The base comes from a synagogue in first century Palestine. And so somehow the very Christian cross and the Jewish synagogue floor somehow go together to express my background and my life.
On November the 17th, 1989, the day Czechoslovakia took a step towards freedom, the world was shaken by the news of the brutal murder of 6 Jesuits in San Salvador. They were guilty of preparing the ground for negotiations between guerrillas and the Salvadorian government in a country exhausted by a civil war. Michael Czerny came here to replace one of the murdered priests. At the age of 43, the Canadian priest finds himself in a country ravaged by violence, a country where death is a daily experience. On top of this, the government soldiers responsible for the murder of his predecessors consider the Jesuits their enemies. Michael Czerny reflects on this every morning in his prayers.
You can't live here without being reminded daily and sometimes hourly that there are good reasons to fear. But fear is not a permanent part of your daily life. It's like it has to go into the background, otherwise, in fact, it controls you and you can't do anything else.
The assassination of the Jesuit priests in San Salvador was a shock that helped end a civil war lasting over a decade. Yet the memories of what happened remain more than vivid, even after 35 years.
What moved me very much was how my life flowed into the lives of those whom I replaced. I took the course, I taught the course of philosophy, which Father Ea Correa used to teach. I served in the parish in which Father Martin Barrault served in the countryside. But most of all, I became the director of the Human Rights Institute, which Father Segundo Montes had founded and which he directed. Perhaps for me, one of the most touching moments was the first day I went into the office, sat down at his desk, opened the drawer, and found everything exactly as he had left it the day before he was murdered.
In summer 2024, Michael Czerny arrived in Brno, the second largest city in the Czech Republic, where he was born in 1946. With the help of our crew, he retraced the footsteps of his ancestors, who lived here a story full of pain, love, and hope.
For most of my life, this history is something we didn't talk about in our family. And I think of at least 2 important reasons. One was not to dwell on the painful past, to begin a new life and not to spoil it with the tragedy, the sufferings of the past. But the second reason, and maybe more profound, is that my parents didn't want my brother and me to inherit you might say, the prejudices and the hostilities that they suffered, and that one could never be sure and could never predict would come again. And so to be known as Jewish, even in Canada, it was better not. It's only a few years ago, when I became a cardinal, that my brother convinced me that it would be better to tell the story as it was than to suffer from others telling it as they wanted to tell it. And so that's why we are here today having this talk. Otherwise, this would not have happened.
In 1871, the nobleman Eduard Schönborg Hartenstein sold a small monastery brewery to Michael's great-great-grandfather, Michael Hayek. At the same time, his son, Hermann Karl, bought the neighboring land, where he immediately started building a modern brewery facility. 2 years later, as we can see from the notarial record, he and his partner founded the new Brno brewery, which still operates today under the name Starobrno. It is one of the largest breweries in the Czech Republic.
Well, this brewery was in our family when it began. And the grandfather of my grandfather, Michael Hayek, could be called a kind of spiritual founder, and then his sons actually got it going in 1870s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. And it's been here since then?
As far as I
In the
know.
spot? Wow.
Yes.
Wow. And it was in your family from the 1870s?
Until the beginning of the Republic, when it was nationalized.
Okay.
I like to think of it as an industry vital to the good of the nation, and so it had to be industry.
It was nationalized already in after World War I?
That's right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that was...
Then my grandfather continued to work here as a director.
Okay. And the whole family stayed in Brno, or the family moved away?
Oh, no, the family stayed and continued to be involved, but no longer as the owners.
Okay, and then his children also continued to work here?
Well, no, then came the war and all that, so...
Oh.
Lovely, hello.
Hello, děkujeme.
Thank you.
Prosím.
Okay, so this is the beer, right?
This is the beer.
This is the beer.
The beer we-
Na zdraví.
Na zdraví.
Michael Czerny laid a stone at the Brno Jewish cemetery on the grave of Michael Hayek, who was born in the small village of Mistřín and later founded a brewery in nearby Hodonín. His son, too, was born in a small town, but the revolutionary year of 1848 allowed Jews to settle again after 400 years in Brno. And it was Hermann Karl who was converted with all his family to Catholicism.
On the question of conversion, yes, there was widespread conversion. It had started even earlier in the early 19th century within the Habsburg monarchy of Jews who wanted to advance socially, professionally. An interesting question is what they chose to convert to. And so under the Habsburg monarchy, because it was a Catholic monarchy, because the emperor was a Catholic, Jews were more likely to convert to Catholicism.
My grandparents were Catholic, but I believe that when their families became Catholic, that this was not really so much a change of faith as it was a change of social situation. They had their baptism, their wedding, and their funeral, but I don't think it was much more than that. The only Jewish practice I remember is we celebrated Christmas on the 24th of December in the evening, and in our family the tradition was that we knew when Christmas began using the Jewish custom of the first star. That this was always repeated every Christmas, that we had to look outside for the first star and then Christmas could begin. It didn't matter that my family was Catholic. They were treated as Jewish. And my grandparents and the two boys, my two uncles, went to Terezín. And there my grandfather died. And my grandmother and the two sons, Karl, Robert, and Georg, were shipped probably to Mali-Trostinets in Belorussia, where the boys died, were actually very brutally killed. And then my grandmother died somewhere in Germany 3 or 4 weeks after the war.
The Terezín archives revealed more. Hans Czerny's death preceded his departure to the extermination camp by only 5 days. It is certain that Michael's grandfather already knew that he and his entire family had been assigned to the transport to the east. And it is very likely that he took matters into his own hands before being subjected to further suffering. In Malý Trostinec, most of the victims were killed immediately upon arrival at the execution site in the forest near Blagovčina. The remaining prisoners were herded into a barn before the arrival of the Red Army in the summer of 1944, where they were shot and burned. There was no escape from this hell for anyone.
This is a beautiful photo of my parents when they were very young, probably soon after they were married, and maybe before all the troubles began. This is my father, Egon Czerny, at his work as an architect when he was finishing also his architectural studies at the Deutsche Technische Hochschule. He met my mother when they were both very young, but they married in civil marriage in June of 1938. In other words, when it was already very dangerous and difficult. All of his family were against it and put lots of pressure on him not to do it and eventually also to divorce my mother. But they really were faithful to each other, and they, in a certain sense, they saved each other, because being married to a so-called Jewish wife, he was not trustworthy enough to serve in the German army, and therefore he was not sent to the front, where he would have probably been killed. And my mother was probably better off than the rest of her family, because she was married to a non-Jewish German. And so while she was in Terezín, she wasn't shipped to one of the death camps. So the story is really that they saved each other. And I think this is an important part of the story.
Tady stojíme na místě, které je vlastně velice těsně spojeno s osudem válečným paní Winifred. Pár metrů od hrobu Franze Kafky stával pracovní a koncentrační tábor Hagibor. A bylo to právě v tomto táboře, kde byla vězněna Winifred Czerny. Ona tady byla nasazena na práci, pracovala pro firmu, která se jmenovala velice složitě německy, ale obsahovalo to slovo Glimmerspalterei, což je něco jako loupárna slídy. Traduje se, že ty slídové tabulky se používaly k tomu, aby odrušovaly spojenecký radar, aby vytvářely falešné obrazy na radaru.
At the end of January 1945, the entire works was transported to Terezín, where Michael's mother lived to see the end of the war. Egon Czerny had been interned in the labor camp in Postoloprty since the autumn of the previous year, because he refused to divorce his Jewish wife. After the war, they were happily reunited and finally able to return home.
My parents already tried to immigrate before the war. They spoke with contacts who seemed to make it possible to emigrate to Ireland or to India, but that failed. After the war, there were two main motivations, or maybe even three main motivations to leave. One was to leave this tragic and horrible past behind. And I think that if you compare the situation in which my parents grew up 20 years earlier and what it was in the mid-1940s, this wasn't the home they knew, and maybe there was little reason to stay. Secondly, while they had suffered because of our Jewish background, they were still German speaking. And as the things changed, this now became the reason for prejudice and even persecution. And so the third reason, maybe the most obvious, was to have a new start. And that's exactly what happened. When we got to Canada, we basically began from nothing and with nothing.
In their last difficult weeks in Czechoslovakia, Michael, his parents, and his younger brother were given shelter in what is now called Villa Neumark, the home of the Neumark family.
I remember picking gooseberries here in the garden. But the nicest memory is that in the living room, there was an angel about my size. And so this angel became a kind of personal friend of mine. We talked, but we also disagreed. And so this was a memory from Villa Neumark.
One day, Otto Walter Neumark loaded Winifred, Egon, and their two little boys into his car and drove them through the Russian zone to the airport in Vienna. Family legend says that Winifred breathed on the windows so that it would be more difficult to see who was inside. They flew to Switzerland, from where they left for Paris, and then they continued west to war-ravaged Le Havre, where they set sail across the ocean. The family landed on Canadian shores a few days before Christmas, 1948.
The Scythia is the boat on which we traveled from Le Havre to Halifax. During the war, it was a troop carrier, and then it was quickly reconverted for transporting migrants and refugees. One day in the mid-Atlantic, I decided to take a walk, and my mother was looking for me everywhere. And finally, she found me on the bridge chatting with the captain. And I vaguely remember how she picked me up and took me away very quickly. Over the years, I seem to follow my mother's example in rather forgetting the past. And so I didn't think of myself much as a migrant or a refugee. But when I began to work in 2016 in the migrant and refugee section and listened to what migrants and refugees and displaced people actually were saying, I began to recognize this is my story too. Hello.
Buongiorno.
How are you?
Bene, lei com'è andata la mattina?
Okay, okay. And at home?
Tutto ok, grazie.
Thank
Facciamo
you.
una tazza di tè?
Yeah.
Michael Czerny became a cardinal in 2019. The memorial card he had printed for the occasion depicts the Holy Family's flight to Egypt. It was painted before the war by his grandmother, Anna Hayek, a fine horse rider and amateur artist. Also extraordinary is his Cardinal's Cross, which accompanies him on his many journeys.
A dear friend of mine from Chicago was on his way here to accompany me when I became a cardinal. But before he arrived in Rome, he went to Palermo, and there he met someone who was showing him the city. And he said to him, I need to stop in a religious store to buy a cross for my friend who is going to become a cardinal. And after explaining for a while who I was and what I did and so on, the man, who turned out to be Domenico Pellegrini, the artist, said, we are not going to a store, I'm going to make the cross. And so they went to his studio and he took wood, which is called Lampedusa wood, the wood left over from fishing boats that were used to bring for the migrants to cross the Mediterranean and try to reach Italy. Some of the boats arrived, other boats were shipwrecked. And so this cross made from this wood reminds us how Jesus is crucified today.
Wait on the boat! We're coming! Wait! Take the baby, please.
From 2017 to 2021, I was one of the 2 undersecretaries of the section for migrants and refugees here in this department. And we were following the very clear program that Pope Francis had expressed, which is that our response to all those who are fleeing and who are in despair is to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate. After another one of those terrible shipwrecks in the Mediterranean with the loss of so many migrants' lives, the sculptor, Timothy Schmaltz, said to me, "Father, when is this migrant crisis going to end?" And I said to him, "Timothy, migration is not a crisis. It is a fact of life. We have been moving since the beginning of time, and without migration, we would not be here." And so this gave him the idea of portraying the migrants of all times and all places.
The Angel's Unawares statue was installed at St. Peter's Square in Rome in September 2019, on World Migrants and Refugees Day. On the gallery, we can count the statues of 140 saints, and we also see 140 migrants crowded on board the bronze boat. The sculpture suggests that they can be seen as angels, who often come unnoticed. At the stern of the migrant ship are the parents of Michael Czerny, whose portraits were created from a photograph taken before they fled to Canada. Winifred Czerny didn't like to go back in time, but in 1995, at the age of 77, she visited Terezin and wrote in the visitor's book, "I survived." She also created several dozen sculpted portrait heads, which got their eternal resemblance by passing through the heat of the kiln. 3 of them were donated by the Cardinal's brother Robert to the Terezin Museum. One of the portraits shows her son, Kardinál Michael Czerny, during the time when he was a rank-and-file priest in a poor neighbourhood of Toronto. A man who accepted and understood the tragedy of his own family as a challenge to help all those in need.
This whole story, marked by great cruelty, suffering, and destruction, is somehow salvaged by people taking other people in. And that is surely what this poor world of ours needs much more of.